All right, let's talk about both custom REST web services and RESTful web service call outs. Okay? So first of all, generically, when talking about REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It is an alternative to SOAP. So in the case of SOAP, SOAP is built around posting XML documents from one system to another. Well, in the case of REST is a higher performance, lighter weight way of sending information either from one system to another, or there's some use cases that revolve around utilizing it in mobile applications. But what REST does is REST says, well, instead of doing a post of a document for every type of communication, maybe we can use the other HTTP verbs or methods, things like HTTP GET, HTTP DELETE, in order to define the type of operation that we want to do. So it maps very well to what we already are doing in Salesforce with respect to our CRUD-oriented operations. If we use the Salesforce REST API, the standard Salesforce REST API, as an example, it supports both. It supports many different of those HTTP methods. It also supports a lighter weight document format. So for instance, in addition to supporting XML data, it supports JSON. And as you can tell by just taking a look down here we're expressing, we have a couple of hemispheres being expressed in an XML document versus a couple of hemispheres being expressed within JSON. One of the key advantages of JSON is just how lightweight the document structure is. So they tried to strip it down to as bare bones as possible to identify the beginning and the end of for instance, what would be a tag in XML. In the case of JSON, we use an open curly brace and a closed curly brace to define that JSON object or element. So if you think about if I'm going to do a query to some other system, I might have something like, let's say I'm looking up in this example, here's an example of a RESTful web service call out where we're going out to some external system and we're validating an address. So is this a valid address? In other words, if we have an address like 1 California Street in 94111, but the state code is set to Massachusetts, then we have a problem because that's an invalid address. So what we can do in this case is we can just send an HTTP GET, extremely lightweight because all the information that we need is within that URI. So we're going to make the request out to the system that is going to provide the service. Inside the HTTP query string parameters, we have the address that we'd be passing over to that system to validate if this is a valid US address. So it's at the end of the day, it's a lighter weight, less stringent specification for doing web services. Okay. All right. Like I said, one of the key advantages of doing REST is that because it's so much lighter weight, it's much more optimal for things like mobile devices. If you think about a mobile device, it's operating on a 4G network instead of an Ethernet network, so our bandwidth is much more limited. All right, so at the end of the day, we can do REST within Salesforce. Now, we have the option of defining custom web services in Apex, where Salesforce is the server, or doing RESTful call-outs to some other system where Salesforce is the client. First thing we're going to talk about is where Salesforce is the server and we're defining custom REST web services. So what we can do within an Apex class, so once again, this being a custom web service, we would need to have a global class. You'll see that we've annotated the global class with the REST resource annotation. Now what this is doing is this is indicating the route that we're going to be, or part of the URL that will ultimately, our client somewhere out there, which is going to be calling into Salesforce, will be using to call the custom web service that we're creating. So here we have /contact/v1 and then asterisk. And the reason we have that asterisk, if you think about a web service callout or just a web service, one of the things that we might be indicating is in the URL that you're requesting, we might have something like a record ID or some of the information as a part of that call. And it's not a RESTful example, but inside Salesforce, if you do salesforce.com/record ID, that's the mechanism we use to simply view a record. All right, so this is the root of the custom RESTful web service that we're going to be creating. The next thing that we're going to have is we can have a number of methods, but only one for each type of HTTP method that we want to support. But there's a number of these other annotations that we would apply to methods. The HTTP post annotation, and then here we would have a method. So when someone made a post to this URL, or for that matter added anything onto the end of it, which is what that wildcard is doing, we would then be posting up a JSON document, which we would then deserialize to pull out the string last name and then our account. Okay? We would then pass it to this method, and then we would perform some logic and do something with it. Okay? There are a number of annotations that we support, so HP delete, get, patch, post, and put. And these are to be used for the different types of CRUD operation that you plan to perform. So for instance, with an HTTP delete, or for that matter an HTTP get, neither of those have a body, but as a part of the URL that you're requesting and any HTTP query string parameters, that defines what you either want to delete or fetch. And then there's patch for doing updates, post for doing creates, and so on. So the put would be matched to a, you can think of the put being matched to a upsert. When we have a custom web service, one of the things that we're going to want to do is to be able to see more information about the request. So to access things like our query string parameters that might have been passed to us. And in order to do that, there is this REST request class. And so from our custom web service, we can use this REST context.request to fetch the information or the the details about the HTTP request that came in. Same thing goes if we're going to set up, for instance, maybe we want to set something on the response, we can access that REST response. From your instance, the route for calling custom REST web services within Apex is services/Apex REST. Okay? This is different, just so you know, from our standard REST API, which is services/data. So Salesforce knows when we're coming in and requesting a custom web service, remember what we previously talked about was the /contact/v1. And so the full URL that you would request is the HTTPS server.salesforce.com services Apex REST contact v1, but understand that we can also have additional elements or items on the end of that URL. If you are working with XML or JSON in Apex, we have utility classes that will generate XML or parse XML that you might have received. Same thing goes for JSON, generating a JSON document or reading a JSON document. In the case of XML, there are two sets of classes. There's the stream reader and writer, and then there's the document and XML node. And the idea behind the stream reader is that you iterate over an XML document one item at a time. So you essentially do a has next, and then you check to see, is this what I'm looking for? Okay. The document and XML nodes are different. In the case of the document and XML node, you can do something like say, hey, fetch me this value in this tag in this location within the XML document. So there's kind of a difference in the sense that one of them is fast and lightweight, but you have to write logic to kind of look, iterate over it, and then inspect it to see, is this what I'm looking for? Versus load it into memory and say, so just go down to this area and fetch me the value that I'm looking for. For JSON, we have the JSON generator and the JSON parser. So we can either generate a JSON document or we can parse a string that was passed to us. Okay. There is a class called HP HTTP, which has a single method, which is send. We can use this to do an HTTP callout from Apex. There's also a couple of other classes that make this all work. There's the HP request class and the HP response class. So when we're going to do a callout from Apex to call some external system, we would generate or instantiate an HP request. We're going to call setters. We're going to do things like set the endpoint. In other words, what's the URL that we want to call? If we're going to do a post, then we're going to need a document to post to the external system. So we'd set the body. We can set up the header. So we can do things like indicate that we're zipping or something like that. And then the method. Do I want to perform a get or a post or whatever? Now, after you're going to see, we're going to call the send class. We're going to get back a response. So when we get back our response from doing the call out, we're going to check the HP status code. So did I get back a 200 or did I get back a 301? And if I'm doing something like an HP get, maybe I'm going to get back a document. So I'm going to call get body to access that document. I'm then going to utilize either my JSON or my XML parsers in order to parse through that document. Now, another thing that you might be doing is you might need to, for instance, URL encode your, whatever URL that you're fetching as a part of the HP get. Same thing for the document that you're sending. You would want to base 64 encode it to make sure it's safe. Your binary data is safe going over the internet. The crypto class can be used to do digital signatures or to encrypt the content that you're sending over to the external system. But here's the actual code that is doing the call out to the external system. So here we have our HP object. What we're going to end up doing is creating an HP request. We're going to set the endpoint. So in this case, we would have received some, HPS that we're going to be calling. But we're going to set the endpoint. We're going to do an HP get. And then here on line 14, where it says h.send, so using that HP object, send our request, wait for a response, and then we're going to then, in our case, access the body of the document that we just requested. So how do we test a web service callout? Remember that we block web service callouts. So when we get to that line in the code, what are we going to do about it? So the problem there is that when we attempt to access this response, essentially it's just going to skip this line, and so our HP response is going to be non-existent. So what we need to do within Apex is to generate mock responses. Okay. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. Much like when we were working with mock data and we were talking about it in the testing section, you can either programmatically create a mock response, or you can, using static resources, load up a file which represents a mock response. So here's the programmatic way of doing it. And what you end up doing is you generate a class which implements the HP callout mock. And what you're going to do is here we're creating our, our fake response. And so what we're going to do is we're going to generate our new fake response. We're going to set up the header that we got back, set up the body that we would have gotten back, so that when we run our test code, we're going to do this test.setMock. We identify that we're doing an HP callout mock, and then here is in our case, we called our class HP callout mock implementation or whatever. And so what this does is it says, okay, when I do that callout, I'm going to call this respond method essentially, and I'm going to use the fake response that would have been returned down here. All right, so we can programmatically create a fake response. The other thing that we can do is we can upload a fake response as a file into static resources. Okay, so if you're using a tool like maybe SOAP UI, you can do a sort of a mock call out to some other system and then get back an XML document that would have been the response. And that's exactly what we're able to do with the static resource callout mock, is to upload that into static resources. So you're going to create the text file which represents the fake response. You're going to upload that text file into static resources. Okay? And now what we're going to do is down here, we're going to create this new static resource callout mock. And what we're going to do, the mock response would be the name of the static resource that we would have created. And we're setting some other stuff like status codes and headers and so on. Then in our test code, we say, let's use the class that we created called mock. Okay?